Good afternoon, everyone. We're reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and we're on the chapter entitled The Master with the Brahmo Devotees, Part 1. It's December 1882. If you're following along in your book, it's page 161. It was afternoon. The Master was sitting in his room at Dakshineshwar with M. and one or two other devotees. Several Marwari devotees arrived and saluted the Master. They requested Sri Ramakrishna to give them spiritual instruction. He smiled. Master to the Marwari devotees, you see, the feeling of I and mine is the result of ignorance. But to say, O God, thou art the doer, all these belong to thee, is the sign of knowledge. How can you say such a thing as mine? The superintendent of the garden says, this is my garden. But if he is dismissed because of some misconduct, then he does not have the courage to take away even such a worthless thing as his mango wood box. Anger and lust cannot be destroyed. Turn them toward God. If you must feel desire and temptation, then desire to realize God. Feel tempted by him. Discriminate and turn the passions away from worldly objects. When the elephant is about to devour a plantain tree in someone's garden, the mahout strikes it with his iron-tipped goad. You are merchants. You know how to improve your business gradually. Some of you start with a castor oil factory. After making some money at that, you open a cloth shop. In the same way, one makes progress towards God. It may be that you go into solitude now and then and devote more time to prayer. But you must remember that nothing can be achieved except in its proper time. Some persons must pass through many experiences and perform many worldly duties before they can turn their attention to God. So they have to wait a long time. If an abscess is lanced before it is soft, the result is not good. The surgeon makes the opening when it is soft and has come to a head. Once a child said to its mother, "Mother, I'm going to sleep now. Please wake me up when I feel the call of nature." "My child," said the mother, "when it is time for that, you will wake up yourself. I shan't have to wake you." The Marwari devotees generally brought offerings of fruit, candy, and other sweets for the Master. But Sri Ramakrishna could hardly eat them. He would say, "They earn their money by falsehood. I can't eat their offerings." He said to the Marwaris, "You see, one can't strictly adhere to truth in business. There are ups and downs in business." Nanak once said, "I was about to eat the food of unholy people when I found it stained with blood." A man should offer only pure things to holy men. He shouldn't give them food earned by dishonest means. God is realized by following the path of truth. One should always chant his name. Even while one is performing one's duties, the mind should be left with God. Suppose I have a carbuncle on my back. I perform my duties, but the mind is drawn to the carbuncle. It is good to repeat the name of Rama, the same Rama who was the son of King Dasharatha, has created this world. Again, as spirit, he pervades all beings. He is very near us. He is both within and without. Chapter 7, The Master and Vijay Goswami. Thursday, December 14th, 1882. It was afternoon. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on his bed after a short noonday rest. Vijay, Balaram, M and a few other devotees were sitting on the floor, with their faces toward the master. They could see the sacred river Ganga through the door. Since it was winter, all were wrapped up in warm clothes. Vijay had been suffering from colic and had brought some medicine with him. Vijay was a paid preacher in the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, but there were many things about which he could not agree with the Samaj authorities. He came from a very noble family of Bengal, noted for its piety and other spiritual qualities. Advaita Goswami, one of his remote ancestors, had been an intimate companion of Sri Chaitanya. Thus, the blood of a great lover of God flowed in Vijay's veins. As an adherent of the Brahmo Samaj, Vijay no doubt meditated on the formless Brahman, but his innate love of God, inherited from his distinguished ancestors, had merely been waiting for the proper time to manifest itself in all its sweetness. Thus, Vijay was irresistibly attracted by the God-intoxicated state of Sri Ramakrishna and often sought his company. He would listen to the master's words with great respect, and they would dance together in an ecstasy of divine love. It was a weekday. Generally, devotees came to the master in large numbers on Sundays. Hence, those who wanted to have intimate talks with him visited him on weekdays. A boy named Vishnu, living in Aryadaha, had recently committed suicide by cutting his throat with a razor. There, the talk turned to him. Master, I felt very badly when I heard of the boy's passing away. He was a pupil in a school, and he used to come here. He would often say to me that he couldn't enjoy worldly life. He had lived with some relatives in the western provinces, and at that time used to meditate in solitude in the meadows, hills, and forests. He told me he had visions of many divine forms. Perhaps this was his last birth. He must have finished most of his duties in his previous birth. The little that had been left undone was perhaps finished in this one. One must admit the existence of tendencies inherited from previous births. There is a story about a man who practiced the Savasadhana. He worshipped the Divine Mother in a deep forest. The Savasadhana is a religious practice prescribed by the Tantra, in which the aspirant uses a sava or corpse as his seat of meditation. He practiced in a deep forest. First, he saw many terrible visions. Finally, a tiger attacked and killed him. Another man, happening to pass and seeing the approach of the tiger, had climbed a tree. Afterwards, he got down and found all the arrangements for worship at hand. He performed some purifying ceremonies and seated himself on the corpse. No sooner had he done a little japa than the Divine Mother appeared before him and said, "My child, I'm very much pleased with you. Accept a boon from me." He bowed low at the lotus feet of the goddess and said, "May I ask you one question?" "Mother, I am speechless with amazement at your action. The other men worked so hard to get the ingredients for your worship and tried to propitiate you for such a long time, but you didn't even condescend to show him your favor. And I, who don't know anything of worship, who have done nothing, who have neither devotion nor knowledge nor love, and who haven't practiced any austerities, am receiving so much of your grace." The Divine Mother said with a laugh, "My child, you don't remember your previous births. For many births you tried to propitiate me through austerities. As a result of those austerities, all these things have come to hand, and you have been blessed with my vision. Now ask me your boon. The devotee: I'm frightened to hear of the suicide. Master: suicide is a heinous sin, undoubtedly. A man who kills himself must return again and again to this world and suffer its agonies. But I don't call it suicide if a person leaves his body after having the vision of God. There is no harm in giving up one's body that way. After attaining knowledge, some people give up their bodies. After the gold image has been cast in the clay mold, you may either preserve the mold or break it. Many years ago, a young man of about 20 used to come to the temple garden from Baranagar. His name was Gopal Sen. In my presence, he used to experience such intense ecstasy that Hridoy had to support him for fear he might fall to the ground and break his limbs. That young man touched my feet one day and said, "Sir, I shall not be able to see you anymore. Let me bid you goodbye." A few days later, I learnt that he had given up his body. It is said that there are 4 classes of human beings: the bound, those aspiring after liberation, the liberated, and the ever-perfect. This world is like a fishing net. Men are the fish, and God, whose Maya has created this world, is the fisherman. When the fish are entangled in the net, some of them try to tear through its meshes in order to get their liberation. They are like the men striving for liberation, but by no means all of them escape. Only a few jump out of the net with a loud splash, and then people say, "Ah, there goes a big one." In like manner, 3 or 4 men attain liberation. Again, some fish are so careful by nature that they never get caught in the net. Some beings of the ever-perfect class, like Narada, are never entangled in the meshes of worldliness. Most of the fish are trapped, but they are not conscious of the net and of their imminent death. No sooner are they entangled than they run headlong, net and all, trying to hide themselves in the mud. They don't make the least effort to get free. On the contrary, they go deeper and deeper into the mud. Those fish are like the bound men. They are still inside the net, but they think they are quite safe there. A bound creature is immersed in worldliness, in lust and greed, having gone deep into the mire of degradation, but still he believes he is quite happy and secure. The liberated and the seekers after liberation look on the world as a deep well. They do not enjoy it. Therefore, after the attainment of knowledge, the realization of God, some give up their bodies. But such a thing is rare indeed. The bound creatures entangled in worldliness will not come to their senses at all. They suffer so much misery and agony. They face so many dangers, and yet they will not wake up. The camel loves to eat thorny bushes. The more it eats the thorns, the more the blood gushes from its mouth. Still it must eat thorny plants and will never give them up. The man of worldly nature suffers so much sorrow and affliction, but he forgets it all in a few days and begins his old life over again. Suppose a man has lost his wife, or she has turned unfaithful. Lo, he marries again. Or take the instance of a mother. Her son dies, and she suffers bitter grief. But after a few days, she forgets all about it. The mother, so overwhelmed with sorrow a few days before, now attends to her toilet and puts on her jewelry. Your father becomes bankrupt through the marriage of his daughters, yet he goes on having children year after year. People are ruined by litigation, yet they go to court all the same. There are men who cannot feed the children they have, who cannot clothe them or provide decent shelter for them, yet they have more children every year. Again, the worldly man is like a snake trying to swallow a mole. The snake can neither swallow the mole nor give it up. The bound soul may have realized that there's no substance to the world, that the world is like a hog plum, only stone and skin, but still he cannot give it up and turn his mind to God. I once met a relative of Keshav Sen, 50 years old. He was playing cards, as if the time had not yet come for him to think of God. There is another characteristic of the bound soul. If you remove him from his worldly surroundings to a spiritual environment, he will pine away. The worm that grows in filth feels very happy there. It thrives in filth. It will die if you put it in a pot of rice. All remain silent. Vijay, what must the bound soul's condition of mind be in order to achieve liberation? Master, he can free himself from attachment to lust and greed, if by the grace of God, he cultivates a spirit of strong renunciation. What is this strong renunciation? One who has only a mild spirit of renunciation says, well, all will happen in the course of time. Now let me now simply repeat the name of God. But a man possessed of a strong spirit of renunciation feels restless for God, as the mother feels for her own child. A man of strong renunciation seeks nothing but God. He regards the world as a deep well and feels as if he were going to be drowned in it. He looks on his relatives as venomous snakes. He wants to fly away from them, and he does go away. He never thinks, let me first make some arrangement for my family, and then I shall think of God. He has great inward resolution. Let me tell you a story about strong renunciation. At one time, there was a drought in a certain part of the country. The farmers began to cut long channels to bring water to their fields. One farmer was stubbornly determined. He had a vow that he would not stop digging until the channel connected his field with the river. He set to work. The time came for his bath, and his wife sent their daughter to him with oil. "Father," said the girl, "it is already late. Rub your body with oil and take your bath." "Go away," thundered the farmer. "I have too much to do now." It was past midday, and the farmer was still at work in his field. He didn't even think of his bath. Then his wife came and said, "Why haven't you taken your bath? The food is getting cold. You overdo everything. You can finish the rest tomorrow, or even today after dinner." The farmer scolded her furiously and ran at her, spade in hand, crying, "What? Have you no sense? There's no rain, the crops are dying. What will the children eat? You'll all starve to death. I have taken a vow not to think of bath and food today before I bring water to my field." The wife saw his state of mind and ran away in fear. Through a whole day, back-breaking labor, the farmer managed by evening to connect his field with the river. Then he sat down and watched the water flowing into his field with a murmuring sound. His mind was filled with peace and joy. He went home, called his wife, and said to her, Now give me some oil and prepare me a smoke." With a serene mind, he finished his bath and meal and retired to bed, where he snored to his heart's content. The determination he showed is an example of strong renunciation. Now, there was another farmer who was also digging a channel to bring water to his field. His wife, too, came to the field and said to him, "It's very late. Come home. It isn't necessary to overdo things." The farmer didn't protest much, but put aside his spade and said to his wife, "Well, I'll go home since you asked me to." All laugh. The man never succeeded in irrigating his field. This is a case of mild renunciation. As without strong determination, the farmer cannot bring water to his field, so also without intense yearning, a man cannot realize God. To Vijay, "Why don't you come here now as frequently as before?" Vijay, "Sir, I wish to very much, but I'm not free. I have accepted work in the Brahmo Samaj." Master, "It is lust and greed that binds man and robs him of his freedom. It is lust that creates the need for gold. For lust, one man becomes the slave of another and loses his freedom. Then he cannot act as he likes." The priests in the temple of Govindagi at Jaipur were celibates at first, and at that time they had fiery natures. Once the king of Jaipur sent for them, but they didn't obey him. They said to the messenger, "Ask the king to come see us." After consultation, the king and his ministers arranged marriages for them. From then on, the king didn't have to send forth him. They would come to him of themselves and say, "Your Majesty, we have come with our blessings. Here are the sacred flowers of the temple. Deign to accept them." They came to the palace, for now they always wanted money for one thing or another: the building of a house, the rice-taking ceremony of their babies, or the rituals connected with the beginnings of their children's education. There is the story of the 1,200 Nadas, literally shaved head among the Vaishnava devotees, who also those who renounced the world shaved their heads. And 1,300 Nadis, the Vaishnavas nuns. Just one second. Virabhadra, the son of Nityananda Goswami, had 1,300 shaved-headed disciples. They attained great spiritual powers. That alarmed their teacher. "My disciples have acquired great spiritual powers," thought Virabhadra. "Whatever they say to people will come to pass. Wherever they go, they may create alarming situations, for people offending them unwittingly will come to grief." Thinking thus, Virabhadra one day called them to him and said, "See me after performing your daily devotions on the bank of the Ganga." These disciples had such a high spiritual nature that while meditating they would go into samadhi and be unaware of the river water flowing over their heads during the flood tide. Then the ebb tide would come, and still they would remain absorbed in meditation. Now, 100 of these disciples had anticipated what their teacher would ask them, lest they should have to disobey his injunctions. They had quickly disappeared from the place before he summoned them, so they did not go to Virabhadra with the others. The remaining 1,200 disciples went to the teacher after finishing their meditation. Virabhadra said to them, "These 1,300 nuns will serve you. I ask you to marry them." "As you please, revered sir," they said, "but 100 of us have gone away." Thenceforth, each of these 1,200 disciples had a wife. Consequently, they all lost their spiritual power. Their austerities did not have their original fire. The company of women robbed them of their spirituality because it destroyed their freedom. To Vijay, you yourself perceive how far you have gone down by being a servant of others. Again, one finds that people with many university degrees, scholars with their vast English education, accept service under their English masters and are daily trampled under their boots. The one cause of all this is women. They have married and set up affair with their wives and children. Now they cannot go back, much as they would like to. Hence, all these insults and humiliations, all this suffering from slavery. Once a man realizes God through intense dispassion, he is no longer attached to women or lust. Even if he must lead the life of a householder, he is free from fear of and attachment to lust. Suppose there are two magnets, one big and the other small. Which one will attract the iron? The big one, of course. God is the big magnet. Compared to him, woman is a small one. What can woman do? Now, in this case, what Ramakrishna is talking to a group of men. He says woman, but what he is really talking about is lust. The lust one feels for the opposite sex. So even though it says woman over and over again, all it means is lust. A devotee, sir, shall we hate women then? Master, he who has realized God does not look upon a woman with the eye of lust, so he is not afraid of her. He perceives clearly that women are but so many aspects of the Divine Mother. He worships them all as the Mother herself. To Vijay, come here now and then. I like to see you very much. And I think we'll stop there today after we've had this wonderful reading. Are there any questions or comments? Okay. We have tomorrow Swami Vedarupananda will give the lecture on Raja Yoga meditation at 11 o'clock here in the temple on Zoom and on YouTube. Next Wednesday, we will have the reading of Spiritual Treasures of Swami Turiyananda. Next Saturday, we will have our gospel reading at 5, both are at 5 o'clock, the readings. 5 o'clock Wednesday, 5 o'clock Saturday. Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And next Sunday, we will have a visual presentation of Sister Lalita, who was one of the Mead sisters that Swami Vivekananda lived with in Pasadena. He stayed with the Mead sisters, and Carrie Wyckoff, who is Sister Lalita, was the one who gave her small house in the Hollywood Hills to Swami Prabhavananda, which was the founding building of the Vedanta Society of Southern California. Pravrajika Brahmaprana from Dallas and Hollywood will be giving that visual presentation. So that's at 11 o'clock. I hope you can make it. And we'll end with the chant. Om Shanti, 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.